Thanks to books, we learn about events from the history of past years. However, without photography, it is impossible to fully convey portraits of individuals, people's emotions, the scale of disasters, and much more that can only be imagined by seeing it. In this video, I offer you the chance to delve into the past with the help of 25 of the most unique snapshots. Enjoy watching. The first image of our planet from space was taken in October 1946 by American scientists. The Earth was photographed from space using a V-2 ballistic missile and a 35mm camera. The rocket was launched from the White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico. As it reached an altitude of about 105 kilometers, the loaded camera took photographs at 1.5-second intervals. Upon reaching maximum altitude, the rocket began its descent. Of course, the camera was shattered upon impact, but the film reel with the photograph survived perfectly. The images of Earth from space became sensational, as no one had ever seen our planet from such a perspective before. Interestingly, an attempt to capture similar images was made in 1935. Back then, the American helium balloon Explorer 2 inches was used to photograph Earth from an altitude of just over 22 kilometers. Today, the 1946 photograph may not be awe-inspiring. However, for its time, it was sensational, and people got to see for the first time what Earth looked like against the backdrop of the endless cosmos. The Roswell Incident is one of the most talked-about stories involving UFOs. In July 1947, unidentified metallic and rubber fragments were discovered near a village in New Mexico. Immediately afterward, Roswell newspapers were filled with headlines suggesting that proof of extraterrestrial life had finally been found. The debris of the strange object was sent for analysis. General Roger Mason Ramey was in charge of the detailed examination. Photos taken during the investigation showed Ramey closely inspecting the debris brought to the Roswell base. The following day, the general made a statement claiming that the entire UFO story was fabricated and that the strange object was actually a weather radar balloon. After this, news coverage of the incident abruptly ceased. To this day, the Roswell incident remains a subject of debate. UFO enthusiasts believe that Ramey simply hid the truth from the public, while skeptics trust his final statement about the weather balloon. Anne Frank was an ordinary Jewish girl born in Germany, but fate made her yet another vulnerable victim of the Nazis. Preserved in her family's personal archive are photographs of this cheerful, charming girl. In one of them, Anne is seen sitting at a table, writing her diary, which would later bring her worldwide fame. Anne and her family went into hiding from the Germans in a secret annex in Amsterdam. It was there, in July 1942, that she began writing her diary. In it, she detailed what was happening to her and the others in the hideout. Initially, Anne kept the diary for herself, but after hearing a speech by the Dutch Minister of Education, she decided to write a novel. The plot of the novel was based on real events and meticulously described the cruelty that Jews had to face. Sadly, Anne and her family were eventually caught and in 1944 were sent to the Westerbork camp. In February 1945, Anne Frank died of typhus at the age of 15. Anne Frank's diary has been included in UNESCO's World Heritage List. It has served as the basis for nearly a dozen films, and the text has been translated into many languages. For anyone interested in this story, I highly recommend reading The Diary. It will not only captivate you with its first-person details of events, but also with the thoughts of a child that were far beyond her years. Since the beginning of the 20th century, for 50 years, a large number of climbers had tried to conquer the highest mountain on our planet, Everest. All these attempts had failed due to physiological barriers. Finally, on May 29, 1953, New Zealand climber Edmund Hillary and a Sherpa named Tenzing Norgay managed to reach the summit of Everest via the south. Kernel stages of the ascent were captured on camera to forever preserve this thrilling moment. The photographs reveal that the two men quickly became good friends. As noted by other climbers, Sherpa Tenzing truly possessed a very good, kind, and friendly nature. At the summit of Everest, the two men spent about 15 minutes. There, they took a few more photographs. One of the most famous was taken by Edmund Hillary, capturing Tenzing with his ice axe. Unfortunately, there is no photo of Hillary on the summit, as Tenzing was not familiar with operating the camera. This iconic photograph of the legendary Beatles was taken on February 7, 1964. On that day, the Fab Four from Liverpool arrived by plane for their first tour in the United States. The Beatles' songs quickly gained immense popularity in the US, and their arrival was eagerly awaited by American fans. Needless to say, they already had a massive following in England. On the day of their departure for the American tour, London's Heathrow Airport was swamped with Beatles fans. About 4,000 people came to wish them a successful journey. As the plane carrying the Beatles was preparing to land in New York, the pilot was informed that Kennedy Airport had gathered a crowd unlike anything anyone had ever seen. About 3,000 people. The photographs show American fans joyously waving their hands, welcoming their idols. As soon as the airplane doors opened and the Beatles set foot on the ramp, the crowd erupted in jubilant screams. Undoubtedly, each member of the Liverpool quartet was thrilled with such a reception, but they remained calm and composed, as befits the English. These photographs became a cultural phenomenon, marking the starting point of Beatlemania. Until the 19th century, women in most countries did not have the right to vote or to be elected. However, over time, women's activist movements fighting for equal rights began to emerge. Participants in the British women's suffrage movements were called suffragettes. They organized rallies and fought vigorously for their cause. Gradually, women in different countries began to gain the right to vote. The first to celebrate this milestone were the women of New Zealand in 1893, followed by the women of Australia in 1902. European women gained their right to vote closer to 1917. For them, this meant a victory for which they had fought long and hard. The joy of women who achieved their right was captured in photographs. The first ladies with their ballots smiled ecstatically, proud of their new status. Ultimately, the right to vote for women was enshrined in international law in 1948. Frida Kahlo was a famous artist from Mexico in the early 20th century. This woman combined talent, beauty, and individuality. Despite her serious illness, disability, and personal setbacks, she always remained strong in spirit. Looking at photographs of Frida, you understand what a multifaceted personality she was. Pictures capturing the artist at work convey how emotionally she experienced every subject of her paintings. Her drawings always reflected the emotions she was feeling, including joy, bitterness, and pain. Portrait photographs of Frida depicted her strong, passionate, and vibrant nature. Her appearances always had a uniquely special style. Intricate hairstyles with woven flowers, long dresses and skirts typical of women from the Mexican state of Oaxaca, elaborate blouses and modern jewelry. All these were associated with Frida's individuality. Yet few know that the loose fit of her clothes concealed a corset and a leg prosthesis. Frida Kahlo was one of those women who could tell about themselves without words. We'll never get to know the artist personally, but looking at her photographs, we can understand who she was. On August 6, 1945, an American bomber dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, resulting in the immediate deaths of over 80,000 people. The bustling city was reduced to ruins, as evidenced by these photographs. Looking at them, it becomes unbearably painful to realize how monstrous war is. Tens of thousands of people were living their lives, which ended in a single second. 3 days after the bombing of Hiroshima, an atomic bomb was also dropped on Nagasaki. In total, approximately 200,000 people died as a result of the two attacks. The tragedy in Japan became the first and only instance of the use of nuclear weapons in human history. On August 28, 1963, a protest event called the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom took place in Washington, D.C. On that day, around 300,000 people marched to the Lincoln Memorial, where they were greeted by the legendary speech of social activist and preacher Martin Luther King, Jr. In this photograph, the activist, full of self-confidence and the power of his words, addresses the people, starting with the words, "And although we face difficulties today and will face them tomorrow, I still have a dream." He shares his hope with listeners that one day people, regardless of their racial background, will be equal. Martin Luther King's speech made a profound impact. It is considered a true masterpiece of 20th century oratory. In his address, Luther King made references to the American dream and the Bible, as well as the repetition of the key idea through the phrase, "I have a dream," spoken 8 times. It is believed that thanks to Luther King's speech, civil and voting rights laws were enacted. You might think that the first color photograph was taken somewhere in the 1950s or 1960s. Therefore, you'll be surprised to learn that the first non-monochrome shot appeared in 1861. And here it is before you. The pioneer of color photography was the brilliant British physicist James Clerk Maxwell. He demonstrated to the world that any color can be obtained by mixing just 3 primary colors: red, blue, and green. He decided to apply his findings to photography. For the experiment, he invited photographer Thomas Sutton. The object to be photographed was a bow made from tartan ribbon, placed on a black velvet background. The photograph was taken in sunlight. Maxwell chose 3 vessels with liquids colored red, green, and blue as his so-called filters, which were colored using various salts and metals. As a result, 3 negatives were obtained. On that same day, Maxwell gathered everyone interested in his discoveries at the Royal Institute. After illuminating the 3 negatives with lanterns and the same filters, a single color projection of the bow with tartan ornamentation was produced. This experiment marked the beginning of the era of color photography. On the night of April 26, 1986, an explosion occurred at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant's 4th reactor. The accident became the largest in the history of nuclear power, releasing a massive amount of radioactive substances. Over 500,000 people were involved in mitigating the consequences. These photographs capture real heroes, people who were willing to sacrifice their health for the future of their children. In the first hours following the accident, firefighters arrived at the scene. They had no special protective suits for working in a radioactive zone. They wore their combat gear, gloves, and helmets, with only the Smoke and Gas Protection Service equipped with gas masks. Everyone involved in the initial firefighting suffered from radiation sickness. Some survived thanks to timely treatment, while others died within a year, remaining nameless heroes in photographs. On February 11, 1990, after 27 years in prison, the freedom fighter Nelson Mandela was released. His liberation was televised, with photographers taking numerous shots and journalists conducting interviews, while people celebrated their hero ecstatically. In one of the photographs, Mandela walks hand in hand with his wife Winnie. They are incredibly happy, as Nelson is free again. Their joy is shared by everyone around them because he was the first person to fiercely protect his African people. Nelson Mandela became the first black president of South Africa. During his tenure, he implemented many socio-economic reforms, including free medical care for small children. In 1993, Mandela received the Nobel Prize, and in 2009, the UN recognized him as an icon and symbol of hope. Photographs and footage of Salvador Dali creating his latest masterpiece were taken in 1948. In them, the legend of surrealism is seen sitting in front of an easel at the zoo, highly focused and intent on transferring his idea onto the canvas. This is how his famous painting, The Elephants, was born. It features 2 elephants with incredibly long and thin legs carrying large monoliths on their backs, all set against a red sunset. The Elephants became the last masterpiece in the genre of surrealism. By this time, Dali had already started working in a new direction, later called nuclear mysticism. Long-legged elephants had appeared in the surrealists' earlier works, such as The Dream Caused by the Flight of a Bee Around a Pomegranate and The Temptation of St. Anthony. In the former, the elephants carrying monuments symbolized Sigmund Freud's dream about the death of the Pope. Therefore, art experts speculate that the elephants embodies the end of the artist's work in the direction of surrealism. On May 6, 1937, a horrifying disaster occurred involving the German airship Hindenburg. A photographer captured the moment of ignition and the subsequent crash of the airship. The photograph looks as if it could be a frame from a movie. But this tragedy happened in reality, and it's terrifying to imagine what the passengers on board the Hindenburg had to go through. The disaster occurred while the airship was landing. After dropping its anchor ropes, the Hindenburg suddenly caught fire. 97 people were on board, and 35 of them perished in the tragedy, including one worker who was on the ground at the time of the airship's fall. The ignition and subsequent loss of life led to distrust and fear towards this form of air transportation. Therefore, the terrible incident became a reason for countries to gradually abandon the use of airships. Mother Teresa was a Catholic nun who dedicated her life to helping impoverished people. To do this, she left her convent and lived on the streets of the Indian city of Calcutta. Mother Teresa was often photographed with emaciated children who needed her compassion and help. Amidst dilapidated housing, dirt, disease, and poverty, she was like a ray of sunshine in the darkness. Mother Teresa became the first recipient of the Templeton Prize for her contribution to religion, and she also won the Nobel Peace Prize for her aid to those in need. She continued her mission in Calcutta until her death, and was buried in the city, remaining devoted to her work despite having doubts about her faith. 5 years after her death, she was beatified by the Catholic Church. On November 9, 1989, a significant event in world history took place: the fall of the Berlin Wall. Constructed in August 1961, the Berlin Wall divided the city into East and West. During the Cold War, Germany was split into two republics: East Germany, GDR, and West Germany, FRG. People did not support this division, and when the GDR authorities finally lifted the restrictions due to mass public protests, people began to celebrate. This joy was captured in photos and videos of the event. Upon hearing about the reunification of Germany as a single nation, residents from both sides of Berlin eagerly said their final farewells to the concrete barrier. They didn't wait for authorities to demolish the wall and began doing so themselves on that same day. The fall of the Berlin Wall became a symbol for the end of the Cold War, which had lasted over 40 years, making this historical episode significant not just for Germans, but for the entire world. The photograph of the first man on the moon, Neil Armstrong, has long been a subject of debate. It was once believed that there were simply no pictures of the American astronaut who landed on Earth's satellite because the camera was always in his hands, but it turned out that this was a misconception. There is indeed a photograph, and it is unique. The picture was taken by Buzz Aldrin, the pilot of the lunar module for Apollo 11. Aldrin decided to take a panorama of the surrounding lunar landscapes. Neil Armstrong happened to be in the shot as well. Skeptics argue that the photograph is fake, pointing out various inconsistencies. Regardless of the controversy, the undeniable fact remains: Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were the first humans to set foot on the moon. Marilyn Monroe continues to be an icon of feminine beauty. The most famous photo of the actress was taken during one of her film shoots. In September 1954, at the corner of Lexington Avenue and 52nd Street in New York, filming was underway for The 7-Year Itch, featuring Marilyn. A crowd of press and onlookers had gathered. Monroe was dressed in a white pleated dress and stood over a subway grate. Periodic gusts of air from the subway cars passing below lifted her skirt flirtatiously, accompanied by roaring applause from the crowd. Of course, this moment was captured by cameras, and the photos gained incredible popularity. However, they proved to be disastrous for Monroe herself. During the provocative shoot, her husband, famous baseball player Joe DiMaggio, was in the crowd and disapproved of the spectacle. After the shoot, he caused a scandal, and the couple filed for divorce shortly thereafter. Thus, one of the actress's most adored photos became the reason for her separation from her beloved. The Eiffel Tower is Paris's most famous architectural landmark. Every tourist who visits the French capital has a photo with the tower in the background, which is hardly surprising anymore. What might be more interesting are photographs from the time the tower was being built. Construction of the Eiffel Tower began in 1887 and lasted for 2 years. The project itself was commissioned by the Paris City Council from Gustave Eiffel's engineering firm, after whom the tower is named. The tower was intended to be a temporary structure, serving as the entrance arch for the 1889 Paris World Fair. Archived photographs chronicle the entire construction process of the Eiffel Tower, from the beginning of foundation work to the completion of the dome, as well as interesting snapshots of the workers involved in the construction. After participating in the World Fair, the tower won people's hearts and remains one of the most popular attractions in the world to this day. The famous photo, Gandhi with a spinning wheel, was taken in 1946. Mahatma Gandhi, a fighter for India's independence, elevated spinning to a true cult. All members of his ashram had to spin, and Gandhi himself spun daily, starting at 4 in the morning. But why did he do it? Gandhi believed that the best tactic against British colonizers would be nonviolent resistance or non-participation in anything that contradicts one's principles. He urged his people to reject British goods and engage in daily activities. The Indian spinning wheel became a sort of instrument to assist in the fight for independence. In Hinduism, the wheel has a special, sacred meaning. The wheel of samsara symbolizes the eternal rebirth of the human soul. The Dharma chakra represents the path to enlightenment, and a person turning this wheel could free the world from chaos. Thus, Gandhi hoped that the call to use the spinning wheel would help liberate India from violence and lawlessness. Nicholas II became the last Russian emperor, ascending to the throne in May 1896. Aside from his primary role, Nicholas had many hobbies, such as reading foreign literature, hunting, and collecting cars. He also loved photography. He often photographed his family in domestic settings and during vacations. One of the most famous photographs of the Romanov family was taken in 1913. It features Nicholas II himself, his wife Alexandra, and their 5 children. Looking at the snapshot, one notices that all family members are dressed modestly. The emperor always preferred to wear uniforms. He is dressed in one in almost all photos from his personal archive. Sadly, none of the children looking at us from the picture had a future. 5 years after this photograph was taken, the entire Romanov family was executed. On April 10, 1912, at 9:30 a.m. in the port of Southampton, boarding began for a marvel of shipbuilding, the massive passenger liner Titanic. That day, the pier was bustling. Well-wishers helped with luggage and waved goodbye joyfully. This very moment was captured in a photograph. Looking at the snapshot, it becomes eerily unsettling, as so many happy people with smiles on their faces couldn't even imagine that they would never see their loved ones again. After departure, the Titanic carried 1,317 passengers. Among them were many wealthy and famous individuals for whom the best and most comfortable conditions had been prepared. For poor people, third-class cabins were available. The ship's crew consisted of 988 people. On the night of April 14, 1912, after colliding with an iceberg, the Titanic sank. In this tragedy, 1,496 people died. The photograph of the majestic Titanic serves as a reminder of the unpredictability of our fate. Albert Einstein is universally recognized as one of the greatest physicists in human history. His last name has literally become synonymous with genius, and his formula for the equivalence of mass and energy, E = mc2, is considered the most famous equation in the world. Perhaps the most famous portrait of Einstein is the photograph where he sticks out his tongue. But now, I offer you a look at an equally unique snapshot, taken in 1931. In it, Albert Einstein stands at a blackboard that is completely filled with equations, and someone was lucky enough to attend his lectures. Shortly before this photograph was taken, an interesting incident occurred. The physicist completely filled a small blackboard with equation solutions, and while the students were supposed to copy them down, he left the room. Returning after a while, he found that another much larger blackboard was now in its place. It turned out that the students wanted his notes to be preserved for posterity. Now this blackboard is located in the Museum of the History of Science in Oxford. Wilbur and Orville Wright proved to the world that man can fly. They constructed an aircraft called the Flyer 1. On December 17th, 1903, in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, they managed to carry out the first controlled flight, which was captured on camera. Thanks to the photographs, we can now see how it happened. Orville Wright was at the helm, and his brother Wilbur ran alongside to help balance the aircraft. During their first flight, they managed to lift the Flyer 1 to a height of 3 meters and stayed airborne for 12 seconds, covering a distance of 37 meters. That same day, they attempted a second flight and successfully flew 260 meters. In total, 4 flights were made on the Flyer 1. That's all from me. If you liked this video, don't forget to rate it, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell. Your engagement is the best reward for me. Thank you for watching. See you soon. Bye. See